Hello, I'm Ollie and this is Criminolly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, 10 books I gave 4 stars to that I think probably deserved 5. So I always think star ratings for books are a bit of a tricky thing. On the one hand, they're a very useful shorthand. You know, you can look at someone's Goodreads page and see which books they give them 5 stars to, and if it's someone whose opinion you respect, that can be useful. But on the other hand, how can you really distill the impact a book has had on you down to a rating of between 1 and 5 stars? It's impossible. And no number, you know, even if you gave a percentage rating, and I've seen some people do that, even if you give a percentage rating, how does that really equate to the meaning a book had for you? But they are a necessary evil. So I'm, a big user of Goodreads I log everything I read on Goodreads. And at the end of that, when you log a book as read, Goodreads expects you to put in a star rating. Now, you don't have to do that, but I tend to. Well, I almost always do. It's exceptional for me not to give a star rating to a book. But it's a moment in time thing. I do that rating as soon as I finish the book. And it then persists, and people in 10 years' time could look at my Goodreads for books I read last week and try and gain an opinion of them based purely on my star rating. So that can be dangerous. And recently I've been thinking about books that I gave 4 stars to on Goodreads. So at that moment when I'd finished the book, I thought, yep, that's a 4-star read, and I logged it as a 4-star read. But over time, my opinion of those books has changed, and typically these are books that have stayed with me. They have lingered in some way. And I do think that, truly great books are books that take time to digest. It's very easy to finish a book and be wowed by it, and give it a 5-star rating because it's absolutely blown you away at the time. But I think it's useful to look back over your reading and think, was that really right? How do I feel about that book now? How has my opinion of it changed over time? So I've got 10 books that I want to talk to you about today that I gave a 4-star rating to when I finished them. But with the benefit of time, and some of these books are books I read a few years ago or more. Some of them are books I read a few months ago. But with all of them, there has been a distance. There's a period of time that's passed between me finishing the book and today. And with all of them, I feel like the books have stayed with me in a way. They've made a lasting impression on me. And as a result of that, I think that these 10 books, all of which I gave 4 stars to, were probably worthy of a 5-star rating. So without further ado, let me talk you through the books. And these are presented in no particular order. So the first one, appropriately enough, as we're about to move into June on the Range, is Lonesome Dove by Larry McMurtry. So I read this a year or so ago. A wonderful book, a very famous Western. Some people consider it to be the greatest Western ever written. And I can see that opinion. I can see why people think that. So it's a really sprawling story, really a story about friendship. And it does it incredibly well and does it while also including all the things you would expect in a Western. So a fantastically enjoyable book, very long. So it's, 900 plus pages long, but it's an experience. It's a book you kind of sink into and experience rather than just reading. I gave this book, and this is true for a number of these books, I gave this book 4 stars rather than 5 for a very particular reason, and it's a book I reviewed on the channel. So if you want to look back at that review, you can do. I felt, and I still feel, like the treatment of non-white characters in this book wasn't as good as it could have been. So for a book that is very much about what it is to be human, what it is to live, I felt it focused far more on the experiences of white characters than non-white characters, and I feel that I still feel that is a flaw of the book, but it has stayed with me. The characters in this book, the events in this book, have stayed with me to the extent that I now think I should have given it 5 stars. That criticism, whilst it's a genuine criticism, shouldn't stop this book from being a 5-star read. I do think in every other way it's an absolutely wonderful book. Okay, Next up, something completely different. The Doll Who Ate His Mother by Ramsey Campbell. So Ramsey Campbell, a British horror author. This was his first novel. And this is a book, at the time I really, really enjoyed it. It's a dark, kind of quite, it's kind of slightly gothic, but more than anything, just bizarre and twisted horror novel about this very weird character and very weird events surrounding them. And at the time I read it, I had a really good time with it. I really enjoyed it. But there are scenes in this book that have just sunk into my soul, particularly the opening of it, which features a car crash where something really weird happens. And that the effectiveness of those scenes of horror, which have really lingered with me, have made me decide that actually this for me is a 5-star book. I think it's a truly excellent work of horror. Next up, let's go for another horror novel, an incredibly disturbing book, a famously disturbing book, and one that again I gave a 4-star rather than the 5-star rating to at the time for a very particular reason. That book is The Girl Next Door by Jack Ketchum. So my problem with this book is the fact that the events in the book are very much told from the perspective of a male character, the narrator, and it is a book about terrible things happening to female characters, and I felt that was a limitation of the book when I read it. Now the story, it's quite a well-known book, so you may know the story. It's about two sisters who are basically imprisoned by their aunt and tortured by the aunt and by various kids from the neighbourhood, based on real life events. Incredibly harrowing and disturbing, definitely one to approach with caution. But it's such a powerful book, and despite my that criticism of it, which like my criticism of Lonesome Dove, I still think that is a slight weakness of the book. I also think that what Jack Ketchum's done by making that choice is, I think he's done something quite interesting, and he's made this a book about how ordinary people can be kind of unwitting bystanders to terrible events and not step up and stop those events from happening in the way that they could have done, which I think is a really, really important message. The book is just so incredibly powerful at times that I now think it's definitely a 5-star book. It's really a book that has stuck with me. Moving on then to more horror, and this is a horror heavy list, I would say. So Come Closer by Sara Gran, which is a short horror novel about possession. So it's about a young woman who comes to believe that she's been possessed by a demon. And the thing that's wonderful about this book is you don't know. You don't know if she's having a mental health crisis or if something supernatural is actually going on. And it's a book that's told with such wonderful subtlety around that, the balancing of those two possible outcomes for the for the events of the book, two possible reasons why the events of the book are happening. I think Sara Gran's done a fantastic job of balancing those two things, and whilst when I read it I really enjoyed it and gave it 4 stars, again it's a book that has just stuck with me. It's a book I can't get out of my head, and for that reason now a 5-star read. Very similar, and this may be one that people are surprised I didn't give 5 stars to in the first place, is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. So the classic, absolute classic horror novel. And again, at the time when I read it, I found that with this book there was just something about the language that stopped me fully. I felt like I didn't fully connect with it in some ways whilst I was reading it. Now, interestingly, with the benefit of a few months distance from the book, I find that events in the book have stuck with me, and it made an impact on me that I didn't appreciate it had made at the time. So the story is about a guy who gets a group of people to go and stay in a supposedly haunted house as an experiment. And it's, again, like Come Closer, it has that wonderful lightness of touch and subtlety that means you don't really know if what you think is going on is actually going on. It's beautifully told, and as I say, it's a book whose events and characters have really stayed with me over time, and where I feel like I feel like I've come to understand and appreciate the book more the more distance I've had from actually reading it. Okay, moving on then, let's do one I don't have a physical copy of. So again, another horror novel. This one is Let the Right One In by Ajvide Lindqvist, which is a Swedish vampire novel. So this is a book that is, I mean, it's quite disturbing at times, but also kind of purely enjoyable as a coming-of-age horror story. Now, this, I think, is the oldest book on the list in terms of, the distance between me reading it and the present day. I read this book at least 10 years ago. But it's a book that has really, really stuck with me. So, again, when I finished it, I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was, an enjoyable, creepy read. But there are events in this book, and just the overall kind of story arc of this book, so it's about a young guy who's terribly bullied at school, who comes to befriend a creature who is a vampire, and through them comes to fight back against the bullies. And there's another whole kind of plot line as well, which is very disturbing. But all of those things have really, really lingered with me. And this is a book, the more I look back on it, the more I want to reread it, and the more I think it, really is a fantastic horror novel. I'll do the other one that's on my list here next as a non-physical book, and that is Blackwater by Michael McDowell. So a book that was originally published in 6 parts, so originally published as 6 short novels, serialised over 6 months. You can now get it in a collected edition. A wonderful kind of Southern Gothic about this wealthy family who run like a logging business, and one of the sons of the family meets this mysterious woman who is, has kind of supernatural elements to her, shall we say. And it's really, more than anything, a family saga, but the creepiness and the horror elements are really beautifully woven into it. And the characters really do stay with you. It's a wonderful examination of family life and the kind of rivalries and things like that between people in a family. Again, like Lonesome Dove, I did feel like the non-white characters in this book were not as well handled as they could be. And it's interesting because this is a book that does a fantastic job of examining like LGBT characters. So there are a couple of characters in the book who are, gay or lesbian, and they are really interestingly and well portrayed. But again, like Lonesome Dove, the overall impression the book has left on me, and the fact that I still think about it regularly, has over time overcome my reservations about it that I had at the time of finishing it. So another wonderful book, another book that I definitely want to reread at some point. Okay, moving on then to a short story collection. So the only short story collection in the list today, and that is Poking Holes by Juan Valencia. This is a fantastic collection. Really, really, really disturbing. I know a number of people who've read it who consider it to be the most disturbing book they've ever read. At the time, I think I gave it 4 stars rather than 5 because I felt that some of the stories were weaker than others. But that's natural for a short story collection. But with time, I've come to realise that even the weakest stories in this collection are very, very good, and the strongest stories, in particular one called User, have stuck with me so much. They have really infected my brain in the way that I think a really good horror or disturbing story or novel should. I cannot recommend this collection highly enough. I really do think it's exceptionally good. Okay, some non-horror now. So here we have Out by Natsuo Kirino, so a Japanese crime novel, and again definitely a disturbing book. So this is a fascinating book about a group of women who kind of band together to get revenge on a guy who has wronged one of the group. And it's just a wonderful story of of people in dire circumstances getting together to take control of their lives. And like the other books in this list, it's a book that when I read it, I enjoyed it. I thought it was good, but it's just stuck with me over time. The lives of the women in this book, the terrible poverty some of them are in, the dire straits some of them are in, have really struck with me. And I do think it's an incredibly, a disturbing, but also just a really, really interesting and powerful book. So yeah, another one that's definitely worth reading. And then finally, back to horror. So here we have The MD by Thomas M Disch, which is a very strange horror novel, almost a fantasy novel rather than a horror novel, about a guy who has the ability to heal people, but that ability comes at a price, in that something bad has to happen to somebody else in order for him to heal the person that he's trying to heal. And it becomes as the book progresses, the kind of scope of it expands and expands, and it becomes a really interesting examination of like the kind of medical industry that exists in the Western world today, and how how healthcare always comes at a price, and how there are always people who suffer whenever we make choices about about what healthcare means, what healthcare looks like in a modern society. So an absolutely fantastic book, one again that I'm really interested to reread, and one that has the meaning of which and the subtext of which has really lingered with me over time, and definitely made a lasting impression on me. Okay, time for a random book from the shelves. Today's is Tender is the Flesh by Augustina Bastarrica, which is a book I've talked about on the channel fairly recently, which I try not to do for these random books from the shelf. But I wanted to talk about this one because this is a book I gave 4 stars to. And already it's starting to feel, I'm starting to question that rating. It's a book that's really, really stayed with me over time. And whilst I do think it had some flaws, I suspect there's a reasonable chance this is going to end up on my 5-star shelf at some point in the future. So I hope you found that interesting. Let me know in the comments what you think about star ratings, whether you think they're helpful or not. There's something I try not to talk about on the channel too much. So I don't normally say when I do a book review how many stars I've given it, because I think it, as I said, I think it reduces the meaning of a book down to such a narrow window that it's not always very helpful. But yeah, let me know what you think of them. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff, and I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.